Hello and welcome to another video from the only source of information that you need to not only survive the current apocalypse, but actually enjoy it. And today's video is going to be about love. To anyone who reads the Bible, there can be no doubt that in order for our worship to be acceptable to God, we must have love. When asked which of the commandments was the greatest, Jesus said, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." It is recorded in Matthew, Mark, and Luke that Jesus said this, but the details in each version of the story are different. It seems as if the three different versions of the story are describing three separate incidents. If that is the case, then we must recognize that this teaching was not simply intended for his audience at that time. At the time, historians of the day recorded that there was a lot of bickering going on between Judah's various religious factions about just what was the most important law in the Jewish legal code. Matthew Henry wrote that among the laws that the religionists of the day felt were the most important were the law of circumcision, the law of the Sabbath, and the law of sacrifices. Since becoming Sustenance and Covering, I have run into many similar arguments among the religionists of our day. Everybody seems to be wanting to break the code for getting into heaven without having to give up their selfish behavior. This idea was not totally unique to Jesus. Part of what he said was a quote of Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verses 4 through 5 about the requirement to love God. And then he added that we must also love our neighbor as ourselves. Jesus was simply combining two very important concepts that were already recorded in many other parts of the Bible. On at least one occasion, even the religionist who was asking the question had to admit to the superiority of this one commandment. He, like everyone else, would have recognized that Jesus was pointing out something that everyone should have already known. Mark chapter 12, verses 32 through 34 says, "And the scribe said to him, You are right, teacher. You have truly said that he is one, and that there is no other besides him. And to love him with all the heart and with all the understanding and with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as oneself is much more than all whole burnt offerings and sacrifices." And when Jesus saw that he answered wisely, he said to him, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And after that, no one dared to ask him more questions. Everyone in the crowd would have recognized that this scribe was referring directly to scriptures such as 1 Samuel chapter 15:22 and Hosea chapter 6 and verse 6. "For I desire mercy, not sacrifice, and acknowledgement of God rather than burnt offerings." The people who were questioning Jesus wanted to see him drawn into one of their philosophical debates over religious nonsense. Everyone recognized that Jesus spoke with authority, and there can be no doubt that many living at that time would have wanted Jesus on their team. But as soon as he logically answered this question, none dared to say another word. Suddenly, everyone in the crowd would have recognized the foolishness of their belief systems. At least once a week, for the last 6 years, someone has questioned me about some stupid religious nonsense, such as which day is the proper Sabbath, and how to pronounce the name of the Lord. Is the earth flat? Is it okay to eat pork? But nothing that I say ever puts an end to it. Perhaps from now on, any time that I am confronted by religion, I should say, "I love you," and leave it at that. In Matthew chapter 22 and verse 40, Jesus summed up his response by stating that the entire law and everything written by the prophets is based on these two commandments. Once again, Jesus was simply pointing out that the greatest of all of the laws ever given to mankind was natural law. The 10 Commandments given to Moses, as originally recorded in Hebrew, was a perfect written description of all of the instinctive laws placed in mankind at creation. Anyone who would practice what Moses said at Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verses 4 and 5 would by default love his neighbor and keep all 10 of God's commandments. It should be easy enough to recognize that if you love God and your neighbor, by default you will not kill your neighbor. You will not steal from your neighbor. You will not covet your neighbor's material possessions or family members. And given the opportunity, love of neighbor and self would require that we be willing to rest. It should be brought out that even the most loving person would not instinctively know how to build a tabernacle, or the proper way to sacrifice a goat, how much skin to surgically remove from their son's penis. The seemingly arbitrary law of Moses was designed from the beginning to represent all arbitrary laws that had ever existed in the past or would follow in the future, whether the laws of Babylon, Egypt, Rome, or the U.S. Outside of the natural instinctive law placed in Adam at creation and the 10 Commandments given to Moses, no law has ever been created that has been based on the law of love. Much of the confusion about just what love is has to do with the unclear way that the Bible has been translated from its original languages into the languages of our modern Bibles. In our modern Bibles, there are 2 words that end up getting translated into our English word love. As English speakers, we understand that there are different levels of love. The love that we have for chocolate would obviously not be the same as our love for our children. Christianity's leaders understand precisely what these 2 different Greek words mean, but have intentionally kept that distinction hidden from their congregations for hundreds of years. The 2 different words that I am talking about are philos, Strong's G 5384, and agape, Strong's G 26. Since these 2 words are not linguistically similar, we should want to understand why. The explanation that is presented by the cults is that unlike the English language, the ancient Greeks had 6 different words to describe love. Of those 6, only agape and philia are found as standalone words in the New Testament. Each of these words supposedly describes a different kind of love that in English would simply be called love. That isn't exactly true. Language is language. And even though languages may have different words and may be structured differently, as far as I can tell, all languages are designed to do the same thing: communicate thoughts. In English, words like love, prefer, like, lust, romance, and desire might be perceived as the same word to an outsider, but to those of us who speak English, such words are obviously different. In an English dictionary, none of these English words would be defined in the same way. If the ancient Greeks wanted to communicate something, we can trust that we as English speakers would have the ability to communicate that same idea. The ancient Greek words philia and agape can easily be communicated using the English language. Agape is love. It's the only word found in the Bible that accurately communicates what love is. Agape is the word that is used in each of the Bible verses that I have quoted so far. Most definitions of agape as found in Christian reference material are not misleading, but neither are they clear. Fortunately, we can come to a better understanding of how agape and philia relate to one another simply by looking at how those words are used in the Bible. 1 John chapter 4 and verse 8 says, He that does not love God, he that does not love does not know God, because God is love. Literally, he that does not agape does not know God, because God is agape. Nowhere in the Bible is anything comparable said about the word philia. It is important that as you are listening to the information in this video, that you keep in mind that it is only agape that can be rightfully translated as instinctive, natural love. All of the emotions that a human being can feel were created by God. As such, it is not a sin on man's part to experience the emotion of philia, but since God is agape and not philia, we can conclude that the emotion of agape is somehow not the same as the emotion of philia. Even though God is agape, according to John chapter 5 and verse 20, God can experience the emotion of philia. For the Father loves the Son and shows him all that he himself is doing. He will show him even greater things to do than this, and you will all be amazed. In this verse, the kind of love that God has for us is philia. According to this passage, Jesus' listeners in the first century would all be amazed at the things that God was revealing to Jesus, because he was not revealing these things to them. This word philia would be indicating that in some way God was showing favor to Jesus. John chapter 3 and verse 16 says, "For God had so much agape love for the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that so whoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life." At this verse, it is the word agape that is used. So what the Bible is telling us is that God is agape, and is also telling us that God had so much agape for mankind that he was willing to allow us to sacrifice his Son, even though his love for his Son was unique. After years of church indoctrination, it may be difficult to understand the subtle nuances that are being expressed in these statements. But since we, as humans, are familiar with the complexity of human emotions, we shouldn't have a problem recognizing within ourselves the feelings expressed in these verses. It should be obvious that God used the word philia to describe his love for his Son, because that love was unique. That doesn't mean that agape isn't a complete and perfect version of love, because Jesus himself said that his Father loved him, and in doing so used the word agape. John 15:9 says, "As the Father has agape love for me, I have agape love for you. Remain in my agape love." Here, Jesus is using the word agape 3 times to describe the similarity between the love that he had for his disciples and the love that his Father had for him. Being the recipients of that agape love, it would be ridiculous on our part to be jealous of that special relationship that Jesus had with his Father. Jesus' love for us is wonderful. God's love for us is wonderful. Can there really be any reason for us to be jealous of the filial love that God had for Jesus? If we compare every verse where these 2 words appear, we will start to see a pattern emerge. Agape is always just love, nothing more. Perfect love as placed in mankind at creation. The love that everyone earthwide is supposed to have for everyone else. Agape love is the instinctive love that all of humanity would have, even for people that they have never met. Philia is preferential love. According to the Bible, we are not required to have preferential love for anyone, but we are required to have agape love for everyone. Romans chapter 13 and verse 8 says, "Do not owe anything to anybody with the exception of owing them agape love. Those who have agape love have fulfilled God's law." Nowhere in the Bible will you find a similar statement about philia love. Obviously, if God had philia, or preferential love for his Son, then it would not be wrong for us to have philia or preferential love as well. We all experience this emotion. We may love everyone, But we would obviously love the people that we know more than we love the people that we have never met. We often love members of our family more than we love the family that lives next door. It is likely that our English word feelings evolved from the Greek word philia. Our love for mankind in general, according to God's natural law, would be agape love. The feelings that we have for those close to us would be agape love combined with philia love. Another way to think of the difference between agape and philia would be as instinctive love and love according to personal choice. In most cases, the Greek word philia could be translated as preference, prefer, or favor. Even though philia love is often shown towards someone that we have agape love for, and even though agape love is never wrong, sometimes philia love is wrong. According to the Bible, there is a perverted version of philia love. As Romans 13:8 says, those who have God's natural instinctive agape love have fulfilled the law, meaning that without agape love, a person would be breaking God's law. Obviously, the preferential love, the philia love, the special feelings that we can have for someone or something should never cause us to stop having agape love for any human being. That would be evil. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 10 says, for the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. At this verse, the word used to describe love for money is philia. In this instance, philia gyria, love of money. Understanding this concept reveals why Paul referred to the love of money as philia gyria and not agape gyria. Since this verse is about an emotional attachment to something evil, it should be obvious that such an attachment would not be part of any natural or instinctive behavior. Love may be part of our natural makeup, but love of money is not. According to the verse, much of the suffering inflicted upon mankind has been caused by the love of money. Since causing suffering would go against God's natural law to have agape love for all mankind, it should be quite simple for anyone to see that the philia love of money in and of itself is wicked. This form of philia love is not a good thing. We all feel better when we have an abundance of money. And we may all feel depressed when we don't have enough money. But that is not what I am talking about. As long as our feelings for money are not strong enough to compromise our agape love for others, we are not breaking God's law. Even though it is obvious that God understood how mankind's emotions could be perverted, there is nothing in the Bible or the natural world that would lead us to believe that God approves of human beings having a love of money that is greater than our love for our neighbor. As we're reading our Bibles, we're going to see a distinction made between philia love and agape love, but not in English. It only exists in the original languages. When the Catholic Church originally translated the Bible from Attic Greek into Latin, they had that distinction removed. When King James had the Latin Bible translated in English, that distinction was not restored. But if we understand the basics of how God feels about things, we should be able to determine which word would have been used in the original Greek. The books that make up our New Testament. It is simple enough to check this for ourselves. There are plenty of online Bible reference materials that are available for us free of charge to reveal which original language word is being used at whatever verse we might be researching. Obviously, the churches are not going to tell you that the love of money is a good thing, but should you question the goodness of money itself, you will be quickly corrected. I have heard more than one Christian saying that money in and of itself is not evil, but only the love of money. Since most people feel that love is something that cannot be proven in a court of law, they do not feel guilty about loving money more than anything else in the world. It's as if they believe that God is some kind of wicked human judge. It is and always has been business as usual for mechanics to charge outlandish prices for work that they have not done. Doctors universally prescribe expensive medicines and procedures that are known to have little, if any, real benefit. Salesmen normally use every tool of deception that exists to convince their customers to purchase products that are more profitable, whether or not they are any better. The single largest growth industry on the planet is theft. Expensive insurance policies, warranties, and maintenance agreements that rarely do what they promise. Overseas companies that sell expensive products with no intention of ever delivering. The list goes on and on. It is and always has been very difficult to find work not based on deception, theft, and fraud that pays a living wage. One of Christianity's primary functions is to defend Satan's scorekeeping system. To speak out against the economy of their God would be blasphemy. In my lifetime, I have personally seen hundreds, if not thousands, of examples of religious people using the misleading teachings of the church to defend insanely evil acts. So have you. And probably what I am about to tell you will come as no surprise. But many who listen to the information that I am about to share will become incensed. The word patriotism is defined as love of country. This kind of love would very obviously be a form of preferential love. In other words, philia love, not agape love. It could be compared to the love that someone might have for a family member. It could be said that our countries are a part of our extended family, but that would be a perversion of the truth. We can have philia love for individual family members because we know them personally. Our preferential philia love should only be based on real-life interaction with individuals. There would be nothing natural about loving someone that we have never met more than someone else that we have never met, simply because they are somehow related to us. In fact, this kind of philia love, this preferential love of extended family, could be more wicked than the philia love of money. By definition, things like racism, xenophobia, patriotism, nationalism, chauvinism, and Zionism are all nothing more than forms of unnatural, preferential, philia love for things that are not real. Someone may argue that their philia love of their nation, race, gender, heritage, or culture does not affect their agape love of humanity. I have never once in my life witnessed a single example of any of the things that I am talking about coexisting alongside agape love. Where I live, there has been an ongoing battle over the displaying of icons associated with the American Civil War, which was fought over 150 years ago. The American Civil War was obviously fought for the exact same reason as every other war that has ever been fought. Satanic, ritual, human sacrifice. However, most believe that the war was over the issue of slavery. Obviously, those who descended from the race that was enslaved would be offended by items memorializing such an insanely evil, obsolete government policy. I have never in my life taken a stand one way or another in this debate because I love white people and I love black people. I always try to understand the emotions of my brothers and sisters, even if their motives are questionable. I cannot imagine any reason why someone would feel the need to fly a flag that they knew would be offensive to someone unless such a person was lacking in agape love. But in the same way, I cannot imagine ever feeling the need to tell someone what kind of flag they can fly. Once again, agape love, would have to be lacking before someone would take such action. It is always better to simply try to find things that we have in common rather than seeking out reasons to pick a fight. Admiring a statue of George Washington or Patrick Henry, who were both very cruel owners of human slaves, while at the same time demanding that a statue of some Southern general be taken down, really doesn't make any sense to me. More human beings have been enslaved, defrauded, and murdered under the banners of America than were ever enslaved, defrauded, and murdered under any flag of the Confederacy. I cannot imagine flying the flag of any nation while complaining about the flag of any other. This planet is quite literally polluted with flags and statues of human rulers. Someone expressing preferential philia love for any of Satan's champions would have to be lacking in agape love for the victims of such men. It is because of patriotism, philia love of country, that walls are built to keep out people that we as human beings are supposed to instinctively love. It is because of patriotism, philia love of country, that nations are invaded and people that we as humans are supposed to instinctively love are murdered and stripped of their resources. In the past, God arbitrarily set apart a single nation in His dealings with mankind, and as such it could be said that God had filial love for Israel. But His filial love did not necessitate ridding Himself of His agape love. Even when He exterminated entire nations for engaging in wickedness, He had agape love for the inhabitants of those nations. When God kills someone, it isn't the same as when a human kills someone. As the Bible says in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 19, God can resurrect the dead. Humans cannot. According to Matthew chapter 11 and verse 24, even the citizens of very wicked places such as Capernaum and Sodom will be resurrected on the last day and given another opportunity to adjust to God's natural law of love. When humans travel to distant lands to take part in the genocidal campaigns of their individual nations and rulers, they have no grounds for claiming that they are doing it out of love. But I have heard more than one religious person use the Bible to defend carnal warfare based on agape love. John chapter 15 and verse 13 says, "Greater agape love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." I have heard this verse used at more than one military funeral. I can promise you this: John chapter 15 and verse 13 has absolutely nothing to do with any combat deaths. When Jesus laid down His life, His intention was to lay down His life. Jesus was not killed while invading someone's homeland in order to procure more wealth and power for Herod. In order to make ritual human sacrifice seem like a good thing, propagandists have been manipulating the human language so as to make words such as duty, loyalty, devotion, and honor seem as if they are defining good things. Such words are forced upon children through the public education system, and grown-ups are manipulated in the same way via the networks and other media. There are several words in the Old Testament and several words in the New Testament that could be translated as some of the words that I just mentioned, and several English versions of the Bible do so. Most words that are rendered as duty, loyalty, devotion, and honor have very little to do with the righteous principles, or with any righteous principles or characteristics. Basically, all such words are different aspects of the same thing: ritualistic acts of worship demanded by a deity. Our English word devotion originated in the Latin language as a word meaning consecrate. Throughout the Bible, all verses about devotion to God are a good thing. All verses about devotion to something else are a bad thing. Any god that is not the Creator is not deserving of devotion, and certainly no human being or government would be deserving of such either. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 17 says, "Honor everyone. Have agape love for your brothers. Respect God. Have honor for the ruler." Obviously, it is not wrong to show honor where honor is due. Oftentimes, refusal to do so can have dire consequences. But we must keep a balanced view of such honor. Mark chapter 12 and verse 17 demands that we render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. No ruler has the right to demand what rightfully can only belong to God. Should a human ruler demand that his subjects pay him tribute in the form of a tax, then he would certainly be within his rights, as one of Satan's representatives, to do so. God does not issue currency. If he did, then it would be within God's right to demand a tax as well. However, God does instill within us the ability to love, and as such, it is within His rights to demand that we pay tribute to Him in the form of love. Galatians chapter 5 and verse 15 says, "For the entire law is fulfilled in keeping this one command: love your neighbor as yourself." Then Galatians explains what qualities to look for in determining if someone is only concerned with themselves. Enmity, strife, jealousy, anger, dissension, division, envy, and control of others. All qualities related to competition. It also explains what to look for in determining It also explains what to look for in determining if someone is filled with the Holy Spirit. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and control of self. None of these qualities would benefit someone that is competitive. Even loyalty can be a bad thing. The only person that we are ever told to be loyal to is God. In fact, the Bible commands us to be loyal to God just as He is loyal to mankind. By definition, loyalty must be unconditional. It would be foolish to be unconditionally loyal to any wicked human or wicked government. A very famous and popular American quote is, "My country, right or wrong." This statement perfectly defines loyalty to a race, country, government, or political party. Unconditional love without regard for what is right or wrong. In the military, we were always reminded it was not our business to do what was right, but to do what we were ordered to do. It must be stated, without equivocation, that most of the qualities that I am talking about are condemned by God. Romans chapter 13 and verse 8 says, "Owe no man anything but to love one another," and once again, "For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law." We may prefer the company of some more than others, but by definition, philia love, the preferential love that humans were designed to have, is not defined as eternal. We can prefer to be in the company of one person, but on another day we can prefer to be in the company of a different person. Filial love is not the same as devotion or loyalty. In any case, we all need to be aware that there are two different words that end up getting translated as love in our English Bibles. They are not the same word, and they do not mean the same thing. Even in English, we have multiple words that represent different kinds of love. We also have multiple words that represent different kinds of hate. The differences between racism, nationalism, chauvinism, and patriotism would be somewhat like the differences that exist between words like enmity, strife, jealousy, anger, dissensions, divisions, envy, and control of others. But as Galatians 15:20 indicates, they would still be the same thing. Wickedness. If you don't want to survive, don't listen to me.